Well, good morning. Is everybody excited about the long weekend? Yes, and it's such a beautiful, thank you, Anakin, such a beautiful weekend. And I was thinking, there's one more left. Summer's half over. But if you're one of these half cup full people, summer's only half over. I tend to be on the, it is half over. But anyway, it's good to be here. Just one note about the Lakeside 101. It is kid-friendly. So Rose, our kids pastor, will be there. She'll have activities for kids. There'll be snacks that are appropriate for kids. So don't let that stop you from coming. If you're a family that has been coming in the last little while, by all means, join us next Sunday right after the gathering, and we'll just have a great time together. Yes, we are in a two-part series. Last week we talked about what we do for a living. This week I want to ask you, why do you do what you do? Why do you do what you do, whether it's your day job, paid or unpaid? Why do you do what you do? Whether it's on a factory floor, a surgical gallery, or changing diapers at home. Why do you do what you do? Did you have no other choice? Is it because it just pays the bills? Did you stumble into it? Was it your parents' expectations for you? Is it a career of prestige or a great paycheck or summers off? Is it because you just absolutely have to do this thing because it's your passion? And if you're a student here this morning, what's the filter that you're using to think ahead to the career path that you might choose, the educational path that you might choose, what you might do with your life, and why you might do that with your life? Today we're going to see what it looks like to live out of a place of calling, to work from a place of purpose, regardless of what we do. And we're going to look at one guy's story who's going to point the way to that. And it's a fascinating story. It's a riveting story. And he's actually going to point the way to what that could look like for some of us in our lives, Monday to Friday. Last week, we looked at the question, what do you do for a living? And how pervasive that question is in our culture. It's the first thing we tend to ask someone, or are asked, right, in an introduction. Hi, my name's Robyn. It's great to meet you. Tell me, what do you do for a living? It's just so natural. It rolls off the tongue. And we unpacked the cultural assumptions that sometimes lurk beneath that question, intended or unintended. Sometimes it's just a conversation starter, and it works. But I think you'd agree that in our culture, our job and our vocation has become sort of a measure of who we are, of our identity, even of our value. Our doing is our being. Our work is our identity. Our vocation is our value. It's just the cultural waters that we swim in. And can I just clarify, it's not a bad question. I don't want us to be paranoid about never asking that question again. I'm really interested in what people do for a living, regardless of what it is, how they got there, what education took them there, how they arrived there, what thrills them about their job or doesn't. It's just interesting, isn't it? Because it's such a big part of our lives. But for some, it's an unwelcome question because they feel diminished as a person, because of the cultural judgment that might be associated with that particular job or vocation. However, it might be equally as harmful to those of us who love what we do, who are in a great vocation, as society would deem it a great vocation, receiving our inherent value from what we do. There's dangers on both sides. And I'm just wondering, and I was pondering this after last week, what are some questions that we could ask instead of that? Hi, my name's Robyn. It's nice to meet you. Tell me, what gives you joy in life? That might be a question. What are you hopeful for these days? I wondered if our questions could be more about our being, who we are, than our doing. Those are just questions that we could ponder as we think about this whole topic. So we're in the second of a two-part series, Let Your Life Speak. And if you are just tuning in today, don't worry, you won't be lost. Hopefully you'll be able to track with us. If you do want to catch part 1, it is on our website and on our YouTube channel. And we are going to be challenging the cultural notion today, again, of calling and vocation and career and society's expectations of that, the metric that society uses, and how it interacts with our life of faith and our life of work. Last week we said career is not calling. And it's not. It's not our primary calling. It's not to diminish or to disparage our careers. They're a big part of our life. They may well be part of our calling. But it's just one sphere of our lives in which we live out just a way grander calling than that. I said last week that not all of us have the luxury of pursuing our passion for our job. Some had to leave a fulfilling calling in their homeland in order to start over in a new country. Some didn't have the opportunity to discover what it was that they really wanted to do with their life, what their passion was. Some were robbed of the opportunity to pursue something that they loved, their heart's desire. So does that mean they missed their purpose in life? Does that mean they now live a second-rate life? They'll never be able to live into a life of calling? No, not at all. Our primary calling, as we said last week, is from Jesus, to Jesus, and for Jesus, regardless of what we do for our work, our job, or Monday to Friday. That's where we find purpose. That's where we find fulfillment. That's the mandate that we've all, every last one of us, have received from God. And that's what fires all of our cylinders, regardless of what we do Monday to Friday. Everything else flows out of that calling, from Jesus, to Jesus, for Jesus. Our relationships, our work, our desires, our goals and aspirations all flow out of that primary calling. Parker Palmer has written he's written a lot about calling. He's written a beautiful little book called Let Your Life Speak. And he says, vocation is that which we can't not do. Vocation is that which we can't not do. We're trustees of God's creation, right? That means we take care of God's creation. We're co-creators with God. We're co-restorers with Jesus. Whether on a factory floor, surgical gallery, or changing diapers at home, that's our calling. And we can all live into that. And so what does that look like? What does that actually look like? Last week, we looked at a low-life scumbag, actually, by the name of Matthew, who basically he was the armpit of society, as we would think about it. But his name meant gift from God. And he encountered Jesus personally. And Jesus called Matthew out of his scumbag life into his true calling, into who he was created to be. He was called to partner with God in this project of peace and restoration. And that might sound like hippy-dippy language, peace and restoration. But friends, here at Lakeside, that's a project that we're passionate about. We want to help people to discover and fully follow Jesus, which means restoring them to their relationship with God, their right standing with God, to one another and to all of creation. That's one of our dreams for us here at Lakeside. So what was the impact on his life and his day job? Well, he left it. He walked away from his job. And this week we're going to look at another low-life scumbag. There's actually a lot of them in Scripture. I don't know if you know that, but it is a book of scumbags. And he encounters Jesus has a totally different outcome. It's a story of ironies and reversals. And so we're going to just read this passage, and believe it or not, we are back in the book of Luke. It seems like we just can't escape Luke. But this is a powerful story, and it's only recorded by Luke. And so here we go, Luke chapter 19, verses 1 to 10. I'm going to be reading this week from the New American Standard Bible, just another one of the English translations. Some of you collect spoons, some of you collect rookie cards. Preachers collect Bible translations. That's what we do. Anyway, Luke 19, 1 to 10. Here we go. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through, and there was a man called by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. Zacchaeus was trying to see who Jesus was, and he was unable to due to the crowd because he was short in stature. He has 3 strikes against him right away. He's rich, he's a tax collector, and he's short, and we'll unpack that later. So he ran on ahead and he climbed up a sycamore tree in order to see him because he was about to pass through that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and he said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for today I must stay at your house. Now, anyone here who's grown up in Sunday school? Yeah, or online? Yeah, you probably have that song now running through your head, right? Zacchaeus was a wee little man. You'll be singing it all afternoon, I guarantee it. You're welcome. Anyway, we go on. And he hurried, and he came down, and he received him joyfully. And when the people saw this, they all began to complain, saying, he is gone to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. Now, last week we looked at that word sinner. It's not your average Joe sinner. It's a subset of society. It was like the equivalent today of arms dealers, drug dealers, pimps, human traffickers, those who prey on the vulnerable. But Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, that's Jesus, behold, Lord, half of my possessions I'm giving to the poor. And if I have extorted anything from anyone, I'm giving back 4 times as much. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. I learned a new word this week. I love learning new words. Anybody else like learning new words? Oh, come on. Nobody? Somebody. Good. Anybody online? If you've learned a new word in the last month, please drop it in the chat box online, because I'd love to see what the new words are that people are, if they're repeatable, just the repeatable words. But depending on the dictionary that you refer to, some say there are 470,000 words in the English language, others 750,000 words in the English language. But there's actually a global language monitoring organization. Wow, a global language monitoring organization. They count the number of words globally in every language. And they say in English there are upwards of 1 million words. 1 million words, imagine that. Do you know how many we use on an average day and an average week? Any guesses? A pathetic 5,000 to 10,000. Like, that saddens me. Think of all those amazing words just out there not being used, words that say exactly what we want them to say, and yet we don't even know what they are. 5,000 to 10,000. Anyway, that seems like an awful waste to me. But my new word is, and you probably already know it, I didn't, it's physiognomy. And physiognomy is assessing a person's character based on their physical features. Assessing a person's character based on how they look, based on their appearance. Like, how crazy is that? That's where we get the term stuck up, though, and thick-headed. It's a vestige, a carryover from this practice of long ago. Apparently, it was a thing in the ancient Greco-Roman world. That was the world of Jesus, and it is in some parts of the world today. Can you imagine putting your physical characteristics on your resume in order to see whether you qualify for the job, whether you have the aptitude for the job, whether you have the character for the job? On the other hand, if we're honest, like gut level honest, I think it's kind of present still today, just lingering in our society. Stats say that, Indigenous and Black women have a harder time finding health care. They're not believed when they arrive at emergency in the same way. Our differently abled friends, do we underestimate their abilities, their intelligence? Have you ever judged someone's abilities by their accent, the color of their skin, their gender? Society's changed a lot, and there's a lot of things we can't ask on an application or in an interview, and that's a really good thing. And yet, I think we would agree that we still have this tendency to judge people by their appearance, don't we? This was the legit world of Jesus. And so when we read that Zacchaeus was short, this isn't just some random description of Zacchaeus about his physical height. This was an assessment of his character. So when Luke puts that in there, he is saying, it's like an alert. Friends, this is who we're dealing with. We're dealing with someone who is small-minded and greedy. That was the assessment of a short person. So he's got 3 strikes against him, 3 negative references. He is rich. And if you're a Jew in first century Israel under the oppression of Rome, you only get rich one way. And that's on the backs of your fellow citizens. He's a chief tax collector, not your run-of-the-mill tax collector who were already despised. He has worked his way up the ranks. He is a traitor of traitors. He's in bed with the Roman government. Today would be like a Ukrainian working with the Russians to turn over his fellow countrymen. That's how he was viewed. It's no wonder people spat on tax collectors. He'd worked his way up, stepping on his brothers and sisters. So he was rich. He was a chief tax collector. And now Luke tells us he was short. And in his culture, that automatically meant you were small-minded and you were greedy. That's physiognomy. Being short in Jesus' day meant you were a lesser person. So think about that for a minute. Think of how he would have been the brunt of so many jokes, nasty jokes, hurtful jokes growing up. He would have been called names. His parents probably wouldn't have expected much of him once they realized he wasn't going to be growing very tall. His siblings would have derided him. And this isn't just kids being mean. This was the culture. Physiognomy was an accepted science. So it was assumed right from the get-go that Zacchaeus wasn't going to amount to very much. So he is conditioned to have a low expectation of himself. Never mind what other people thought of him. What he thought of himself was nothing. That he would never measure up. Imagine living with that. I suspect some of you have. I suspect maybe some of you still are. Thinking you'll never measure up to the expectations of yourself or others. They didn't expect much. So how can he measure up when nobody else expects anything of him? And he's bought into this lie. He's clothed himself in the labels that have been slapped on him. What a weight to carry, what a burden. And he's lived up to those names. The names that his peers called him, small-minded and greedy. And yet at the same time, you can kind of say, well, he's pushed against it, right? It's kind of like, how do you like me now? Rich, well-fed, luxuriously housed, great wine, servants. What about you guys? You're barely eking out a living. So you got to know how to play the game. Can you see these voices in his head? Do you see the trap that he's in? Once he lives up to what others expect of him, which, takes a job fitting to the label, once he lives up to that, greedy and not much, then he confirms what everybody already thought of him. See? He's greedy and not much. It's a circular situation, isn't it? He's trapped in this nightmare of lose-lose. It's a game he can't win. And any dignity or social status that he may have gained through his wealth, he completely throws away when he runs and he climbs up this tree. You see, Middle Eastern men, they didn't run. It was just beneath them to run. Scholars agree that this is actually a hilarious picture. Luke has painted this so that we get the idea how ridiculously hilarious this is, how humiliating this is. One scholar said, he's enacting a public freak show, and it would have brought howls of derision. He went up the tree to see Jesus. Does he want or expect an interaction with Jesus, or does he just want to kind of see him from afar? Is he like a stargazing Torontonian at TIFF, or a Guelph fight with Adam Sandler? Is he admiring from afar? Or does he get more than he bargained for? And we know from the story he does, because with Jesus, we always get more than we bargained for. But the irony continues, and I love the language in this story. Notice how the crowd looks down on Zacchaeus. Jesus looks up at Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus takes a position of height and control so he can control the situation. And Jesus comes along and he's the one who stops. He's the one who says the first word. He's the one who takes control of the situation. Zacchaeus climbs up to see Jesus, and Jesus calls him down so that he can be seen. Jesus wants a relationship up close, not admiration from afar. And this may mean nothing, but this is literature, remember. It's theological literature, and sometimes the language in the text itself conveys the message. So Jesus shakes up this up-down social ladder that they're all locked into, and he invites himself to Zacchaeus' house. So when I invite myself to your house, I'm being biblical, just so you know. But he invites himself to Zacchaeus' house to eat with him. And this is huge, right? Given who Zacchaeus is. We said last week that to eat with someone is to share life with them, to be brought into intimacy with a family or a person. And so the crowd freaks out because of who Zacchaeus is. He's scum as far as they're concerned. They spit on him as he goes by. And yet Jesus says he's going to his house and he's going to eat with him. He's going to share life with him. That would be interpreted by the crowd as Jesus condoning Zacchaeus' lifestyle. That's why they freaked out. Stop and think for a moment. Who's that person if you had dinner with, or that event that you went to, that place that you were seen, would bring a backlash from your family and friends? You think of that? We experience that today, don't we? If you've been tracking with us over the past few months, you'll notice that the crowds are often displeased with Jesus. And not because of his rigorous rules, but because of his radical welcome. Who he hangs out with, who he does miracles for. It's like, no, not the centurion. How could you do a miracle for him? You see, the crowd doesn't see like Jesus sees. They don't see what Jesus sees. Last week I read a part of the passage from the Indigenous translation, and I'd like to read from it again today in verse 5. When Creator sets free, that's the name for Jesus. When Creator sets free came to the tree, he looked up and he said, "Pure of heart." That's what Zacchaeus' name means. Pure of heart. Pure of heart. Come down. Take me into your house. Jesus didn't just notice Zacchaeus. He saw him. He saw him. And Jesus always sees us first, friends. He sees through the labels that are slapped on us, the expectations that have been placed on us. And before Zacchaeus could say anything, Jesus spoke. And he called him by his real name. Pure one, come down. I want to have a relationship with you. Called him by his real name, not the names given to him by his society, but pure of heart, righteous one. Man, if you're here today, I just so want you to hear Jesus calling you by your real name, beloved, pure of heart. After this, we're going to have a time where we can just sit and hear the Holy Spirit. But I just feel like I'd love you just to pause right now and imagine yourself as Zacchaeus. Wherever you are, whatever labels you're wearing that you despise, just hear Jesus call you by your real name. Jesus asks Zacchaeus, let me into your life. I want to be a part of your life. And what happens when Zacchaeus hears his real name? What happens when he welcomes Jesus into his home? What happens when he encounters Creator sets free? And what happens when Creator sets him free? Total transformation. Zacchaeus becomes what he was created to be. He becomes pure of heart. Verse 8, Luke says, this is what he says to Jesus. Behold, Jesus, half of my possessions I'm going to give to the poor. And if I've extorted anything from anyone, I'm going to pay it back 4 times. 4 times. We can't underestimate the about face that Zacchaeus experienced. Half of his wealth, friends, half of his wealth to the poor. That's half of his savings, half of his assets, half of his retirement plan. He gives it away. And then what's left, he uses that to repay to people 4 times over what he took from them. It's huge. These are huge sums of money because he's filthy rich. He didn't just say a prayer. He didn't just say, I'm sorry. But he was transformed. Something happened to him that day. There was a turnaround. We call that repentance, when you just turn the other way. Imagine the reduction in his wealth, though. Imagine the cost to Zacchaeus. Some of you are thinking, I'm out of here. This is too big a risk for me. What if this happens to me? The question I want to ask is, did Jesus ask him to do this? No. Jesus just asked to be invited into his life. What prompted him to do it? Jesus didn't demand it. Was he trying to impress Jesus? We know from other stories that Jesus can tell what people are thinking. He can tell the motives of their hearts. So if that was the motive, just to impress Jesus, he would have called it out. Instead, what does Jesus say? Today, salvation has come to this house. Transformation has come to this house. Salvation has come to this house. Redemption and rescue has come today. Zacchaeus responds out of desire, not obligation. He responds out of a pure heart, not out of any religious requirements that were placed on him. Creator sets free, has set him free. Os Guinness has said, calling is not only a matter of being and doing what we are, but also of becoming what we are not yet, but are called by God to be. I'll say that again. Calling is not only a matter of being and doing what we are, but also of becoming what we are not yet, but are called by God to be. Do you see the promise in that? Do you see the hope in that? Jesus isn't talking exclusively about eternal salvation here. This isn't a promise of heaven after Zacchaeus dies, but it's more immediate than that. It's today. Something changed, something happened today. He's been freed from the burden of shame, false accusations, false expectations, smallness, wrong assumptions, labels, prejudices, greed. He's free. He's truly free. And Jesus declares this in the hearing of everyone because Jesus' mandate is to set the prisoner free. And we're invited to join him in that, whether it's on a factory floor, a surgical gallery, or changing diapers at home. I love this story. I love this story on so many levels. Jesus calls him son of Abraham, and that's just Bible speak. You see, by using this term, what Jesus is saying is he's telling everyone within hearing range, he belongs. Just like you belong, he belongs. He's restoring his dignity. He's restoring his place of belonging into the community. He's stripping off the labels and he's revealing the beauty of what is inside Zacchaeus, who Zacchaeus actually is, who he's created to be. And that's what Jesus does. This is part of the gospel. This is the good news. We aren't stuck with the labels we're given. Jesus saw through the pain and the trauma to the real person beneath the veneer and beneath the labels. And he called that forth. He called Zacchaeus into being. That day, Zacchaeus was reborn. He was a new person that day. And you know what's so cool about this story? One of the reasons I love this story is because he stays in his job. We have no indication that Zacchaeus changed professions, that he left tax collecting. Matthew left his job. Some people do that. They change jobs. Other people just change how they do their job. It's one of the reasons I love this story. It's not that I don't love it when people leave and go into professional ministry. I guess I'm in professional ministry, so to speak. But I love it because it speaks to innovation and creativity and imagination. The inbreaking of the Jesus way into our everyday lives, our Monday to Friday lives, our jobs, whether we love them or whether we don't. The person who really sees their colleagues and encourages them. Young people, you might think you're only flipping burgers or serving coffee, but you have the power to change the culture of your workplace. There's nothing like a smile, a pleasant greeting. Actually seeing someone, not just as a customer, but as a person. You have the power to impact the place you work. The employer who sees the person and the needs behind the uniform, not just as one who adds to the bottom line. The grocer who goes to the extra work of collecting up unsold goods to deliver to a shelter. The salesman who treats his expense account as if it was his own account and not coming out of someone else's bottom line. The contractor who caps their income and grows the business. Everything above the capped income is for the poor or for the other. The mechanic who doesn't charge single moms. The office cleaner who prays over every cubicle in every office. The teacher who took retirement early as soon as they were able so that they could have the time to run a food bank for free. Our daughter works for a company that pays its employees to take X number of days a year and work for a charity. There's so many ways to bring Jesus into our workplace, into our Monday to Friday, without being obnoxious. We know those ones too, don't we? We can be Jesus in our workplace, regardless of where that workplace is. Imagine how Zacchaeus radically changed the perception of tax collectors. His personal transformation subverted an industry. The generous taxman, that's an oxymoron. The generous taxman. He's still doing his job. Rome is still getting their due, but he's not gouging people anymore. He's not lining his pockets. He stayed in his job, but he changed how he did it. Vocation is that which we can't not do. And now, as a tax collector, Zacchaeus couldn't not be generous. Zacchaeus couldn't not be honest, because that's who he truly is. That's his calling. And it excites me to imagine a world where people are living this alternative, crazy reality. An outpost, a tasting station, a branch office of heaven, of how God intends life to be. God's way of being done here and now, right where we're at, Monday to Friday. It takes creativity, takes innovation, takes courage, takes imagination. I mean, what does it look like to run a business the Jesus way? I'm sure it's inconvenient. I'm sure it's radical. What does it look like to wipe tables and serve coffee the Jesus way? What does it look like to bring Jesus to work and to fulfill our calling, our true calling, our primary calling, whether our work is paid or unpaid, whether it's a job you love or a job that just pays the bills? Os Guinness has said, instead of you are what you do, calling or vocation says, do what you are. Do what you are, regardless of what we do for a living, whether it's on a factory floor, a surgical gallery, or changing diapers at home. We're all called to be this recreative, reconciling presence of Jesus in our world, now, today. I wonder what that could look like. begins with an encounter with Jesus, begins with hearing Jesus. I wonder if we could just pause for a few moments before we leave and just sit with that. What does it look like for you in your work, whether it's at home or at work, in an office, outside? What would it look like for you to bring Jesus into that? The presence, the fragrance of Jesus into that. To see others as Jesus sees them. To treat others as Jesus would treat them. And if you're living under the burden of the labels that other people have put on you, if you're living out of the mistakes and the regrets of your past, and you feel like they identify you, I want to tell you, Creator sets free. And we just long for everyone who tunes in online or comes into this building or encounters any one of us to know that Creator sets free. So I just want you to listen this morning for a moment. Listen for the voice of Jesus setting you free, calling you beloved, giving you dignity. You're welcome to stay, to linger, to sit in this sacred space, to continue listening for Jesus this morning. I'll be at the front. I'd be happy to pray with you. Kathleen's online. She's our online pastor. And if you're online, reach out to Kathleen. Check out guest services if you want to meet with a pastor, someone to walk with you, to pray with you, to help you to hear Jesus' voice setting you free. I encourage you to do that. May the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you as you go. We love you, Lakeside. Have a great long weekend.